Your yard looked exactly right. The feeder was full. The water was there. The trees hadn't changed. And still, one morning, probably a Tuesday, probably while you were drinking your first cup of coffee, you noticed the quiet. Not the peaceful kind, the wrong kind. The feeder wasn't moving. The branches were empty. And you stood there, trying to work out what you'd done differently, because you were almost certain you hadn't done anything differently at all. That's the part nobody tells you. Birds don't leave because you stopped caring. They leave because something in your yard sent them a message you didn't know you were sending, and in the world birds live in, that message means danger. There are 7 routines that do this. 7 things that feel, to you, like maintenance, like tidiness, like good intentions and that register, to a bird as signals to stay away. Not indefinitely. Not always. But long enough that the relationship quietly unravels. Before we go further, if what you're about to learn changes the way you think about your yard, subscribe, because this channel exists for exactly that moment when something you've been doing without thinking turns out to matter far more than you knew. The last one on this list is the one that surprises people most. Not because it's complicated, because it's something almost every backyard birder does, and because the reason it drives birds away has nothing to do with what you'd expect. There is a sequence that happens at every backyard feeder at some point, and it unfolds so slowly that most people never connect the two events. The feeder fills up with seed. Some of that seed gets wet. It sits in the heat, or the moisture, and it begins to ferment, then to mold. You may not notice it from a distance, but the birds notice it immediately. Here is what most people don't realize about birds and smell. For a long time, science assumed birds had almost no sense of smell. That assumption has been steadily dismantled over the past 2 decades. Research from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and work published in journals including PLOS One have established that many birds, including common backyard species like house sparrows and dark-eyed juncos, are far more olfactory than previously understood. The degree varies by species, but the directional finding is consistent. Birds detect chemical signals in their environment, and they use those signals to make decisions about where it is safe to feed. Moldy seed does not just taste wrong. It carries the chemical signature of decomposition, and decomposition in the landscape a bird navigates means something has died nearby. That does not necessarily mean the bird thinks something is dead, but the cue pattern, the smell, the visual texture of spoilage, the unusual stillness that often accompanies a feeder with bad seed because other birds have already avoided it, assembles into a picture that says, this site is compromised. What the science shows is this. Birds will investigate a feeder once. If what they find does not meet the threshold for safety fresh food, clean surfaces, no contamination, they will leave. And they are far less likely to return on a second pass than most people assume. They do not forget where a site failed them. Clean your feeder every 1 to 2 weeks. Discard any seed that has clumped, darkened, or taken on any smell at all. In humid months, do it more often. This is not a minor maintenance task. It is the single most important signal you send to every bird that visits. You put out a bird bath. The birds came. And then, gradually, they came less. And you couldn't figure out why. Because the water was still there. Still, water is exactly the problem. Birds are extraordinarily sensitive to the condition of the water they use, and for reasons that go beyond hygiene. Researchers at the University of California studying West Nile virus transmission through bird populations established, almost incidentally, something that changes how we think about bird baths entirely. Stagnant water does not just carry disease, it broadcasts it. Mosquito larvae, algae, and bacteria accumulate in standing water within 24 to 48 hours in warm weather. And many of these produce visible or olfactory cues that birds can detect. But there is a second reason still water drives birds away that has nothing to do with disease, and this one is more primal. Moving water makes sound. In the natural environment, the sound of moving water is one of the most reliable indicators that a water source is fresh, oxygenated, and safe. Birders who have added drippers, misters, or solar-powered agitators to their bird baths consistently report dramatic increases in bird activity, not because the birds suddenly like water more, but because the sound functions as a long-distance signal. A still bird bath is silent. A moving bird bath announces itself. Cornell's Project Feeder Watch data, gathered from tens of thousands of observers across North America over multiple decades, shows that water availability, particularly moving water, is one of the highest impact additions any backyard birder can make, and one of the most consistently underused. More species visit water sources than feeders. Water draws birds that never come to seed at all. Empty and refill your bird bath daily during warm months. If you can add any form of movement, even a small dripper that costs less than $20, do it. The birds will find it faster than you think, and the ones who find it first will tell others. This one requires some honesty, because the instinct behind it is a good one. You maintain your yard. You rake the leaves, cut back the dead stems, pull out the spent flowers, and tidy the garden beds in late autumn. It looks cared for. It looks intentional. And from the bird's perspective, you have just removed most of what made it worth visiting. The American Bird Conservancy has been documenting this pattern for years, and their findings consistently point to the same conclusion. What humans experience as mess is what birds experience as habitat. Leaf litter is a hunting ground eastern towhees, hermit thrushes, and fox sparrows spend a significant portion of their foraging time scratching through fallen leaves for insects, larvae, and seeds buried just beneath the surface. A perfectly raked yard, from their point of view, is a desert. Dead flower stems are seed caches. Goldfinches, pine siskins, and house finches will return to the same dried coneflower or black-eyed Susan stem for weeks if it is left standing. The moment it is cut, that resource disappears. The birds don't stop coming because they don't like your yard. They stop coming because there is nothing left to come for. But the signal goes deeper than resources. Research on habitat selection in birds, including work published by the National Audubon Society on urban and suburban bird decline, shows that birds assess yards not just for what they currently contain, but for what the structure of the yard suggests about future reliability. A yard that retains natural elements, layered vegetation, varied ground cover, standing seed heads, signals ecological stability. A yard that is regularly cleared signals instability, the kind of environment where resources cannot be counted on to persist. Leave some of the mess. Deliberately, let a section of leaves accumulate under a shrub. Let the coneflowers stand until February. This is not negligence. It is infrastructure. There is a number that, once you know it, changes how you see every outdoor cat. That number, according to a landmark study published in the journal Nature Communications and conducted by researchers at the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute, is 1.3 to 4 billion. That is the estimated number of birds killed by outdoor cats in the United States every year. It is, by a significant margin, the largest human-associated cause of bird mortality in the country. More than window collisions, more than pesticides, more than any other single factor. This is not a conversation about whether cats are good or bad. Cats are predators. They are extraordinarily effective at what they do, and they do not distinguish between an invasive sparrow and a threatened warbler. But what matters for your yard specifically is something that most people don't factor in. You don't have to see the cat catch a bird for the cat to destroy the yard. Research from the University of Exeter, published in PLOS 1, established something critical about bird behavior near predators. Birds do not return to sites where they have detected predator presence. Not just where they've been attacked, where they've detected. The smell of a cat, the visual of a cat resting near a feeder, the sound of a cat moving through a yard, each of these triggers an avoidance response that can persist for days. Birds that regularly visit a feeder will simply stop if a cat begins patrolling the area, even casually, even occasionally. If you have a cat of your own that goes outside, this is the hardest information in this video. But it is also the most accurate. Keeping cats indoors or using physical barriers that prevent access to feeder zones is the single most effective change you can make for ground-feeding species and low-feeder visitors. No other intervention produces a comparable result. You stopped noticing it a long time ago. The leaf blower on Saturday mornings, the HVAC unit that cycles on and kicks out heat in a mechanical drone, the kids, the music from the neighbor's backyard, the delivery trucks. You have habituated to all of it, which is the normal and healthy thing for a human to do. Birds do not habituate in the same way. Research from the University of Colorado at Boulder, led by Dr. Nathan Kleist and published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, examined the effects of chronic noise exposure on mountain bluebirds and ash-throated flycatchers, and the results were severe. Chronically noisy environments reduced nesting success, elevated stress hormones measurably, and most significantly for backyard birders caused birds to abandon sites they had previously used, with no other change in conditions. Noise drives birds away, not primarily because they find it unpleasant in the way a human might. It drives them away because it degrades the most important safety system they have, their hearing. A bird at a feeder is not just eating, it is monitoring its environment continuously, listening for alarm calls from other species, for the wing beats of raptors, for the rustle of predators in the understory. Noise makes that system unreliable. And a site where the safety system is unreliable is a site where predators can approach undetected. This does not mean you must maintain a silent yard, but it does mean that understanding the noise profile of your outdoor space, and where possible, placing feeders away from the loudest persistent sources is not a minor aesthetic consideration. It is predator defense infrastructure, from the bird's point of view. The quietest corner of your yard, the one you don't use very much, the one that gets a little overgrown and feels slightly forgotten, that is probably the corner your birds already prefer. You may not have thought about it since. The lawn treatment, the aphid spray, the systemic product you used on the roses, the granular application someone recommended for the grubs, it worked, the pests are gone. And so, quietly, progressively, are the insects. A study published in the journal Science in 2019, drawing on data from 529 species and 529 million birds across North America since 1970, found that the continent has lost approximately 3 billion birds in the past 50 years. 3 billion. The researchers identified habitat loss as the primary driver, but the second factor, the one that appeared consistently across species that don't even share the same habitat, was insect decline. And the primary driver of insect decline in suburban and agricultural landscapes is pesticide use. Neonicotinoids, the most widely used class of insecticides in the world, are particularly implicated. Research from the American Bird Conservancy, summarizing studies on white-crowned sparrows, found that even sublethal exposure birds eating seeds treated with neonicotinoids caused immediate and measurable weight loss, magnetic compass disruption, and delayed migration. These birds didn't die. They just left earlier, navigated worse, and arrived at breeding grounds underweight. But the more direct effect for backyard birders is simpler. If your yard has no insects, many of your birds cannot raise their young. Even birds that eat seed at your feeder feed insects to their nestlings almost exclusively. Caterpillars, in particular, are irreplaceable for most songbird chicks during their first 2 weeks of life. A yard that looks healthy and full, but has been systematically cleared of insects is, for a breeding pair of chickadees or wrens, a yard where their chicks will die. Stop the systemic pesticides. Tolerate the aphids on the roses. The birds will handle them. This is the one that surprises people, not because it is complicated, because it is so ordinary. You used to go out to the feeder at roughly the same time every morning. Maybe you didn't plan it that way. Maybe it was just the rhythm of your routine coffee, the yard, the birds. For weeks, maybe months, you were consistent. And the birds learned that. They do not just learn that your yard has food. They learn when you are likely to be there, how close you typically come, how long you stay, and what you do with your body when you arrive. Research from the Cognitive Ornithology Lab at the University of Vienna, published in Animal Behavior, examined how wild birds adapt their behavior in response to individual human routines. And the findings were precise. Birds adjust their activity patterns not to the average human presence in a yard, but to the specific individual they have profiled. They know your gait. They know the sound of your door. They know the difference between when you are going to the feeder and when you are going to the car. What disrupts this is not a single unusual event. It is the accumulation of unpredictability. A week when you don't come out at all. A sudden change in routine, faster movements, unfamiliar objects, the presence of strangers, a dog that wasn't there before. Each disruption doesn't erase what the birds know, but it erodes it. And erosion of trust in the relationship between a bird and a yard is slow to rebuild. Here is what the science points toward and what I want you to sit with. The birds in your yard are not just eating from your feeder. They are building a model of you. They are tracking you the way prey animals track anything that has the size and movement signature of a predator. Except, and this is the part that stops researchers, when they say it out loud, they are building a model of you specifically, and that model has room in it for trust. That trust is not unconditional. It is not sentimental. It is functional, pragmatic, the kind of trust a wild animal extends when the evidence has accumulated over time that a particular presence is not a threat. But it is real. It has a biological basis and a behavioral expression, and it is something you have earned, without trying to, by simply being consistent in your own yard. You did not think of yourself as someone they were watching, but they were watching. They have been watching from the first morning you came outside, and they have been updating their file on you with every visit since. Most of the things on this list, the bad seed, the stagnant water, the cleared leaves, the noise, those are fixable in a day. You change the conditions and you wait for the signal to change. But this one, number 7, is different because what it points to is not a problem to solve, but a relationship to honor. And the way you honor it is exactly the way you built it in the first place, by showing up, consistently, on a quiet morning, in the corner of your yard that belongs a little to you and a little to them. That is what they are waiting for. And when you return to it, they will know you are back. I want to hear your version of this. Has a bird ever disappeared from your yard and you couldn't figure out why, and did you eventually work out what happened? Or is there one bird that has stayed, through everything, no matter what? Tell me in the comments. Every story down there teaches me something about what's happening in yards I'll never see, and I read every one.